this wonderful opportunity to talk about spiritual alchemy today. And of course, that's really a broad topic. And it can be interpreted in so many different ways, and they're all fun, trust me, because I think I've done that every day this week. So, the concept of alchemy comes from basically sort of a medieval interpretation of early forms of chemistry. It also comes from early Greek philosophies. It comes from Egyptian spiritual practice, the Hermetic philosophy. Very interestingly, whether you call it a science, a philosophy, a way of life, or even a religion, that is one of the phrases that has been created to describe what we do. The science of mind and spirit, also known as religious science, is considered a philosophy, a way of life, and for some people, they call it their religion. But none of those are required. And you may have another way that you describe it, perhaps a lifestyle, just a way of being, something that works for you. So already what we do here is a form of spiritual alchemy. But the basis of alchemy, just for this metaphor that we can run with, is that we take the lesser and turn it into the greater. Whether you're turning a base metal, such as lead, into a precious metal, like gold, or you're taking a seemingly base experience and turning it into a precious experience, by some transformative process, you are performing spiritual alchemy. So, there's a simple process of taking the lesser and turning it into the greater. That is one sort of a jumping off place for this conversation. The other happens every time that any one of us goes into the kitchen. Now, depending on whether you're a good cook or not, your results may vary. But the principles are the same. You might take a group of ingredients that heretofore had no relationship to one another. There's this thing that grew over here, and there's that thing that came from this source, and that thing that came from that source. Maybe from many different kingdoms, plant, animal, mineral, and so on. Maybe from several different parts of the planet. And you use known principles to combine those things to create something else out of them. And I don't remember who it was that talked about things being greater than the sum of their parts. A great ancient philosopher. In any case, that's what we do when we combine things, working with known principles of chemical interaction. So if you think about it, there are really sort of two forms of spiritual alchemy that we can talk about today. One is taking a singular experience as an individual and turning it into something greater than it appeared to be at first by working with known principles. The other is combining various experiences and seeing them in a way that is greater than they appeared to be when they weren't combined. Okay? So we have two types of alchemy. One is the simple transformation of a single event, and the other is the combination of them. We add a couple other elements. One element is that we have our personal experience of all of this. And the other is that we also have our experience of it in relationship to other people. Add a third element, and that would be that we have what's going on in the now moment, which we believe is like a new event. And then we have that which has already occurred. So we have singular and multiple, we have individual and collective, and we have present and we have past. So if we start with a singular event, we might think of something taking place that initially doesn't look so good. Eckhart Tolle, in his book A New Earth, describes a good example of that. He says, how about when I get a flat tire on a cold, rainy night, and what I need to do, obviously, is pull over and change that tire. He talks about that as being an act of acceptance. He talks about that act of acceptance as being the first thing that he can do that is positive and constructive given the circumstances. It isn't joy and it isn't enthusiasm. But it also isn't any of these other responses that would be destructive. They come right before acceptance. So there's an example of a singular event. You're by yourself, you get to deal with it, and you have an opportunity to transform the lesser into the greater, in that case, through acceptance. Another one might be a personal past experience that is triggered somehow. The interesting thing about a past experience that's triggered is it may look initially like a new one, but it's really not. But you would still practice the same thing. And in a moment, I'm going to tell you what that is, because the answer is the same for every scenario. But this would be a personal encounter of something that's really from the past. What might that be? What if you go to work and you find out that the evaluation is today? Does that bring up any memories of going to school and then saying, oh my God, the quiz is today. I thought it was next week. You ever did that? I used to I had a stint where I was shocked and amazed, and I somehow kept setting myself up for getting the wrong week, for the quiz, or not like the final exam, but bad enough that I'm supposed to be keeping up and having that. So if you have something come up, like a test, an evaluation, maybe it's a doctor's appointment or a bill that comes in the mail, and you thought, oh, I thought I already paid that, or I thought that was due later. You might have something that triggers a memory of a previous experience. And you have an interesting opportunity with that as well. And as I promised, in a moment I'm going to share the simple steps for spiritual alchemy to address any one of them. But what happens is when that moment of surprise comes, and you're like, okay, regardless of how I feel, I'm in this, and I need to do something about it. When it involves a past experience, you have how you did it last time influencing how you're seeing it this time. You have a memory that's sort of like, it just whips out a pair of glasses and puts them on and says, it wants to tell you this is what this is. This is what it looks like. This is what it means. And that there can be a struggle to see clearly and make a good choice in that moment because there's already an impression about that thing. So it can be a little bit more challenging. We have a couple other examples as well, which would be relational, meaning involving more people in the present moment. This could be, I've done this at home, and I've done it in work scenarios and on teams and in groups and so on. You're having a conversation with somebody, and you think you know each other pretty well, and it seems to be going well, and suddenly you realize, this is not feeling very safe. I think we just had a misunderstanding. And it all kind of goes south, or like this, And there's this realization, oh, wait a minute. This isn't going well. Now, again, all of the previous experiences that are even somewhat related to that, they come up unconsciously and invite you to do what? Fight, flee, or mask it, we can fight or flee without leaving the room, and without lifting a finger. But there can be this opportunity to realize, my goodness, this is not going well. There you are again. You're in the middle of something that you get to respond to. And if you have any history on the planet at all, the history is inviting you to see people and scenarios in a certain way. And the opportunity with spiritual alchemy is to be clear and respond from that clarity in this moment, rather than being pulled into your history. The other relational one that has to do with the past is an encounter with someone that triggers a memory, just like the evaluation that you weren't expecting, or the bill coming due that you thought was later, or you had already paid, or whatever, some element of surprise. This one we know a lot about. It happens when we're encountering a person and being with a person. Technically, maybe it's considered a new relationship. Maybe we've moved from somewhere else. Maybe we just started a new job. Maybe there's a lot of newness in the appearance of our lives. And then we have this encounter with an individual, and it's familiar, right? New person, same stuff, different day. Maybe after all of those changes and all of that newness, you recognize a pattern, very well from long ago. Once again, there's an opportunity to rewrite it, if you know what to do when those moments come. At this point, a lot of us have had quite a bit of education through one means or another, or several, about how our old relationships keep repeating themselves, no matter where we move to, and whether we change our look or our name or our address or whatever, that those things keep repeating. Understanding how to do some spiritual alchemy with those scenarios as well gives us an opportunity to break some patterns that may have been repeating themselves for years. So here's what spiritual alchemy looks like. Whether it's that individual situation like the flat tire on a cold rainy night, whether it's the evaluation or the bill due that you thought was later, whether it's an encounter, a conversation with a friend or a coworker or even a mate that just seems to just turn into a train wreck, or a connection with somebody that's more of a disconnection that reminds you of something from way back. Whatever the case, alchemy involves using known principles to transform the lesser into the greater. The first known principle to keep very, very handy right here is choice. Choice. Choice about what? Well, choice about a lot of things, but particularly about perspective. If you can pause, take a breath, you might excuse yourself and go use the restroom or wherever you can just have a moment, either just by closing your eyes or walking around a corner or going into another room, whatever that is, and pause and just say, I'm at a choice point here. I have a choice. The choice in this moment is, how will I see this? Dr. Gary Simmons calls this the assignment of meaning. He says this is when we decide what we will make things mean. So we have a choice as to our perspective about that scenario in that moment. And it might seem silly, when you're sitting there getting, like I said, a notice of an unexpected evaluation or bill or whatever, but this is real life. We come to study and to practice so that when real life shows up, we're ready for it. So we have a choice. The choice is how we see something. Why is that important? Because how we see it is how we're going to remember it. And memory is creative. And how we see it and how we remember it, which is creative, also determines our belief about it, which is attractive. So you started with something just unfolding, maybe so fast you didn't even realize all this was happening. But if you remember you have a choice about how you're going to see it, then you've chosen what it means. You've therefore chosen how you're going to remember it, Therefore, you've chosen what it's going to create from now on, because it will continue to be creative, nesting comfortably in the creative medium known as your subconscious. It will form a belief, which is going to continue to attract people, places, and things to affirm and confirm it continually, no matter what else you're up to. That's pretty important. And finally, all of that is going to cover how you see something similar next time. A similar person, a similar situation, a similar circumstance. The first thing that's going to come up from that instinctive, I know the answer kind of place is, oh, it's this. Oh, it means that. Oh, when one of these happens, I know what's coming next. Oh, this is how it's going to turn out. So wouldn't you want to program all of that consciously with your spiritual alchemy by beginning with a pause and remembering that you have a choice as to how you see something, how you remember it, so what you're going to believe about it. This is where we break cycles that have been perpetuated for so long. The same is true with the scenario where you recognize that you're dealing with something despite all of your changes of address and your name and your outfits and careers and whatever. It's very familiar. I was just sharing about this before we began. You know, you do these worksheets, the Colin Tipping worksheets and the Byron and Katie worksheets and the Gary Simmons worksheets and the make up your own worksheets. You'll discover that scenario that looks like it's a new one with a new person is actually you and perhaps one of your parents or caregivers as a child replaying itself. You're like, oh boy, that's not fair because they're not even here anymore and I'm still doing this. It's okay. What do? You stop. I have a choice as to how I see this and what I make it mean and how I remember it from here on and what I believe about it from here on. Do that, I've broken the cycle. Don't you just get annoyed with those people who say, oh dear, it's up to be healed. That's okay. It's up to be healed. They're right, but it's a little annoying when you hear it from somebody else. It's up to be healed, but it is. Here's another one that can sound like a platitude, and yet it makes so much sense to me. If we're all in this together, on the subconscious level, on the superconscious level, beyond, behind, above, and all around and within what we think we're doing. What do you think about this idea that maybe we love one another so much we're willing to play whatever role is necessary in one another's experience so that we can all get it? Can you imagine thinking of a so-called enemy or adversary in that way? Wow, she must have really loved me. He must have really loved me to be willing to be in that position in my experience and never have my appreciation and my warm attention and to have instead my wrath. Wow. So anyway, that's quite an exploration in itself. But think about it, it's really just an example of shifting perspective. And by shifting perspective, we have an opportunity to see a person or a situation in another way. So what if, whether this is individual or relational, whether it seems like a new event, which is sort of a joke because there may not be any, or a very familiar old pattern just come up in a new costume. If we first use the perspective that it must be up for me, it must be up for me in some way. If we consider that it's up at the perfect time, And isn't that wonderful, rather than doing like this massive life review every time you wake up? That would be quite overwhelming. Yeah. Forget about it. Maybe we could say, thank goodness, it just comes up a little at a time. In the perfect time, in the perfect circumstances, with the perfect cast of characters. Then again, instead of hearing that line, well, it's opportunity disguised as loss, another blankety blank growth opportunity, say, yeah, it really is an opportunity. And I would like to take advantage of that, practicing my spiritual alchemy, because, I don't want to do this again. And isn't it nice to imagine that if you do that, and you free yourself by choosing a new perspective, by planting a new creative memory, and establishing a new attractive belief, and establishing a new viewpoint that will be there for you next time, that you not only free yourself from the necessity of going through that thing again to get it with yet another cast of characters. I was saying earlier that also what that might mean is that you take that script and you put it in the shredder and you push the button, and nobody has to do that anymore. So it's possible, and I think it's true, that not only can we use these simple tools of choice about perspective and creative memory and attractive belief and how we will end up seeing things in the future, even of the nature of our expectancy, that if we do that, we not only make lives better for ourselves, but we really do something amazing for one another at the same time. And if we did this long enough, can you imagine that we just might get a little cleaning up done? Because we have both our individual experience of the subjective, which is constantly responding to whatever's put into it, and we have the collective. So as we are able to transform for ourselves, we're also able to transform the collective. But we don't do this with some heroic idea. I'm going to go out and save the world today. I'm going to tell everybody what all their stuff means. You probably get a black eye and a broken nose, at least. Lose some friends. But what if you go out quietly and say, I'm going to practice my spiritual alchemy today. And I'm going to remember that I have the power to choose. And I'm going to use it to decide what I make things mean. I'm going to use it to decide how I will write things in my history book. I'm going to use it to decide what I believe. I'm going to use it to craft my authentic perspective. Wouldn't that just take all of those dirty lenses and just sort of, turn them to dust? Wouldn't it leave you with the rose-colored glasses? Wouldn't it leave you with a perspective for moving through life that is not just transformative? Because this isn't always about turning the lesser into the greater. Wouldn't it also put you on a point in this continuum where you start out with what you knew was great, and you discover greater still? Other aspects of this transformative process, this alchemy. We've spent so much time in our process of awakening, in our journey of discovery, in our process of healing. What would it be like to say, now that we know, we can move forward from there with something even more. Discover even more. That would be the ultimate alchemy, wouldn't it? Because if each of us is like one of those separate ingredients, and when we're combined, we're much greater than the sum of our parts. As we clean up our false perceptions, as we replace our old memories that we're creating more of what isn't, as we replace our old beliefs that have been attracting more of what isn't, what will we be creating? What will we be attracting? How will we be living? I believe that our opportunity is not just to go out there and to just incorporate these processes in daily lives so that when we interact with ourselves and one another, we do it in a transformative way. I also believe that in doing this, in committing to this, we quickly realize that there's this vast field of possibility to realize that we've only dreamt about or read about in books because we were so busy working it out and coping, getting by on a daily basis. So I invite you to imagine that just in the course of getting your work done, your errands accomplished, your shopping, your housekeeping, going from here to there, whatever it might be, you have a power to choose how you see everything, what you make it mean, what kind of creative memory you make, what kind of attractive belief you create, and what kind of a perspective you end up with. Remember that as you go out from here today and watch it shape your life and the lives of everyone